So I'd like to go over a brief history of wilderness first aid. Now, you know, wilderness first aid hasn't always been part of the modern medical field. It actually originated in about the 1900s. And I've got some notes here and I'd like to go over those because I really just don't want to miss any of these important highlights of the development of wilderness first aid across the centuries. Now, we can trace wilderness first aid's origins all the way back to the Bible, believe it or not. So in Genesis 1:29, God declared, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it will be yours for food." And herbalists have broadly interpreted that as homeopathic medicine or healing nature of plants. Now, of course, we can connect that right over to Exodus 15:25, where Moses purified water with a tree, Luke 10:25, where the Good Samaritan treats an injured traveler with oil and wine, which were common antiseptics of the time. And then, of course, they ensured his evacuation, which is wilderness first aid protocol. And then, of course, Revelation 22:2 talks about the tree of life and the healing of the nations that is found in the leaves of this tree. So this is, again, a throwback from the ending of the Bible all the way back to the beginning in the tree of life, where the tree provided healing for the nations. So these accounts are all connected to wilderness first aid in a very broad and general sense. And of course we get into the ancient and classical periods, which is 1000 BC to 500 of the Common Era. And of course we have herbal and natural remedies found throughout ancient Egypt and Greece, and the Hebrew healers. All of them employed various types of homeopathic, herbal, and naturalistic medicine. So all these are absolutely the forerunners of what we would determine as wilderness first aid in our modern age. Now, moving on from that, we get in, of course, to the Middle Ages. Now, when things got really sketchy, right? In the medieval times and Dark Ages, we have the monastics, which were the priests of the Catholic Church, and their healing methods, and sadly, their testing methods. This is where a lot of the innovation of good and bad medicine was discovered. So they learned a lot about the human body at this time, and they provided herbal remedies for travelers and pilgrims in remote areas where a lot of their pilgrimage festivals were held. And then, of course, military and exploration. During the Crusades, sword wounds and battle wounds were very common, and so learning how to treat all these through herbal poultices and means, again, all play into wilderness first aid. Now, it's in the 19th century when first aid was actually formalized with the founding of the Red Cross. So industrial and outdoor needs, due to the rises in mountaineering, mining, and remote exploration, demanded medical care in a wilderness environment. And the biblical view of nature's resources persisted throughout all these herbal remedies and all these medical applications. Their motivation behind healing and helping others was biblical in nature. So I find that very fascinating because that's absolutely what motivated me to get into and to continue in wilderness medicine specifically. Now, the Red Cross began to standardize the program during the Civil War, and American Red Cross was founded in 1881, and they formalized first aid, including rural crisis settings, and then they built on the principles of the Good Samaritan. So a lot of biblical narratives, and Clara Barton is the one responsible for founding that organization. And then, of course, we have the modern emergence of wilderness first aid, and that is really thanks to the military campaigns and all the theaters of battle that we have seen over the past 100 years. So thanks to scouting, medics, relying on historical battlefield practices, and then improvisation of those practices into the modern age and modern medical science, they've really got it dialed in. And to be quite honest, we've learned more about battlefield and wilderness medicine, or trauma medicine specifically, since the Iraq War in Afghanistan than at any other time in history, it's believed, because there are so many modern interventions that have taken place over the past 30 years or so. So it's really staggering once you start taking all that into account. And then, of course, in the 80s, you had the founding of organizations such as NOLS, the Wilderness Medical Associates, and, of course, these organizations focused on trauma in remote and wilderness environments, and, of course, led the way in wilderness first aid for the outdoor industry that we are familiar with today. And then, of course, all of these organizations began offering standardized training, which included very little herbal, but more practical trauma-based medicine, which is this pile over here that I'm going to get into in a moment. And then, of course, all of our bushcraft and historical information in this pile, which I'll get to that in a moment as well. But the technology available to us and the continuity of medical care is very transferable between the emergency medicine and, of course, austere and wilderness medicine as well. But all that said, in short, wilderness first aid has always been with us. There has been a time in history when there was no modern medical interventions available at all, and at one time it was technically all wilderness or remote first aid. So what I like to do is bridge between the two eras. I find it vitally important in wilderness first aid training to consult old technology as well as modern intervention. Okay, and so these resources that I have here are just a pittance of the resources that I could have brought out to show you, but things that we do need to discuss, such as this is the U.S. Army Special Forces Medical Handbook. Wonderful resource if you're looking for battlefield medicine that absolutely applies to the wilderness and austere environment. But here's one you may never have heard of. It's called the Indian Doctor. Now this is traditional Native American medicines that they used throughout their histories. So why would you include this in wilderness first aid? Well, there are times when I've been in the woods when I didn't have anything, or maybe I ran out of something, especially when I'm out for a couple weeks at a time. It doesn't necessarily treat a traumatic injury, which is what we're most focused on in wilderness emergency care, but it relates to those long-term illnesses or headaches and toothaches and all the different things that can happen. There are a litany of herbal remedies available to us that we must learn to capitalize on. So when we're out in nature, if we know the trees and we know the plants, we're going to be able to make medicine on the fly and treat a variety of conditions that sadly we're simply not equipped or licensed to provide medicine for. So being able to rely on herbal remedies is a way to bridge that gap. Then, of course, we have the book I wrote, Bushcraft First Aid, and this is with Dave Canterbury. This book's okay. It was written to accompany a class very similar to this one that you're doing now. So this is based on one of our old classes. And so as a standalone resource, it's helpful, but it is best suited to go with an actual hands-on class. And so I didn't have any say in all that. This is a fantastic resource. This is called Or Perish in the Attempt, and this is the Lewis and Clark expedition, and it is specifically geared on the wilderness medicine and the types of maladies that they endured during their travel. Lewis and Clark kept fantastic and very meticulous notes, detailed everything here. This is a great resource I highly recommend. Then, of course, we have the Survival Medicine Handbook, Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy, another great resource full of information that goes well beyond standard wilderness first aid protocols. We have the Knowles Wilderness First Aid Handbook, again, very common, very traditional teaching as it relates to wilderness first aid. Now this is the Civil War Medicine Encyclopedia, another great resource when you're trying to learn techniques that maybe we're not allowed to do for licensure reasons today or certification reasons today, but are definitely on the up and coming side of preparedness medicine. So if you're thinking long-term prepper type medicine, you might want to be considering some Civil War era medical intervention. And then of course this ties right into your Revolutionary War medicine. And how I look at things is I want to be, if the grid goes down and the world collapses, like many of us believe it will one day, well, I myself want to be the best Civil War doctor that I can be. I want to be able to provide all the modern medical modalities that I have access to and be able to administer all over-the-counter medications as well as a select handful of what would have been prescription meds if I have them available. But I also want to know how to cut off limbs and sear them with a hot cast iron skillet and not let that person die. So I want to be able to do a really good job at being the medical guy in a collapsed system scenario. So everything short of surgeries. So that's kind of where I find myself. A great modern book. This is The Home Apothecary by Nicola Palian. Really good book. Has a lot of great information on all your herbal remedies in here. Tells you how to prepare them, how to store them, etc. And one that goes right along with it is Mountain Medicine by Tommy Bass. Appalachian man, fantastic expert. He was a true pioneer in this field. Talks about plants, what they're good for, how to use them. So these two kind of go hand in hand. Fantastic books. I highly recommend all of these if you have the ability to add them to your library. Now let's get into some of the modern medical texts. Of course we have Medicine for the Outdoors. This is by Paul Auerbach, and he is basically the definitive source for wilderness medicine in the modern age. And I'll get to his major work here in a few minutes. But this is a fantastic book. I highly recommend you add it to your library. These right here are curriculum-based books. So in the curriculums here, these are the books that I've had to go through for some of my wilderness medicine certifications. This is Steve Donlin's Wilderness Emergency Care. This is used now by NASAR as their Wilderness First Aid Training Program. It used to be used by ASHE. I have dual qualifications from both of those organizations, so I'm very familiar with this, and a lot of my content is based off of this content as well as a lot of this content and a little bit of this content. So that's how I do. This is the Wilderness EMS manual. This is what the state of Kentucky requires for their wilderness paramedic qualifications. They don't do a standard wilderness first aid, first responder certification. They only certify at the paramedic level in our state, in my state, but this book is the definitive textbook for that. Outdoor Emergency Care. I mean, this is a monster book right here, and this is what would be used by organizations like Ski Patrol or out west when you have wilderness first responder or emergency medical responder certification courses. So this is their one of their older textbooks. This is your standard EMT, EMS textbook. This is Emergency Care and Transportation of the Sick and Injured. Again, another gigantic thick book. About 100, I believe this one is the 150-hour course. There are new recommendations. I believe they've lowered it in some states to 112 hours. They just take out a few of the things. But I've got like 3 different versions of this because I've sat through the nightmare 3 different times. Anyway, another great resource. You can get a lot of this at Goodwill or over at your half-price bookstore. Check out Half Price Books. Pick up these copies. Add them to your library. Now this is the good stuff. These books are hardback. This is Paul Auerbach's Wilderness Medicine versions, or edition 1 and 2. So anything essentially that can be treated in an outdoor setting is covered in these 2 books. Full treatment protocol, everything in between. For example, it's going to get into the resuscitation, the pharmacology, the pathology, the pathophysiology, wildland management. Has a lot of really gory photographs in there of actual cases that have been worked on. how to treat in the hospital and austere setting. Again, fantastic resource here. If you really want to learn wilderness medicine and consider yourself proficient in it, this is one you definitely want to add into your library. I consult these fairly regularly when I'm developing course content. And that's what you're going to find throughout this course specifically, is it is not repetitive as far as what other courses offer. It is a little bit different, but it is well within guidelines of the minimum and probably exceeds most of their standards. I believe that we need to incorporate a little bit more survival-based bushcraft medicine into the standard wilderness first aid protocol. And by not doing so, we are relying too much on modern intervention, which, to be quite honest, the majority of people don't have access to or don't bring with them into outdoor settings. Thus the reason there are so many calls to EMS. So practical treatments, practical emergency care, and good woodsmanship skills will bridge the gap between the ancient and the modern paths. So check out some of these resources. I highly recommend that you add as many of them as you can to your library. Read them though, don't just put them in your library. I've had to read all these and way more because one, it's interesting and I want to be competent on the subject, but again, I don't consider myself a wilderness EMS nerd either. I'm one that likes to read the book and then kind of, okay, I get the gist, get rid of it. Now let's go do the stuff and be very practical. So you'll see that throughout this course as well. So with that said, this is a brief history of wilderness first aid and some of the resources that you can take advantage of. I'll see you in the next video.